Before we begin, I'll do a 5-minute general housekeeping and give you a summary of the agenda. Then I'll hand over to Mameya, who's our panel moderator and host for the rest of the evening. So in terms of general housekeeping, we do not expect any fire drills. So if the alarms go off, please follow the signs for the fire exit. The ladies and gents are the way you came. So if you go out of this building and turn out of this room, and you turn right and right again, it's just at the end of the corridor. We have the cafe at the end when you turn left. So why are we speaking about fintech? It's a very important conversation. The BCS core function is to promote the sharing of knowledge within the wider society. We work with stakeholders such as students, government, industry, training providers, academics, customers, and our members. We help set standards across the industry. We advance and disseminate knowledge. We offer unique networking opportunities such as this one. And we represent the profession to the UK government. We're actually a global organization, and we have hubs in multiple countries across the world with 54 specialist groups. So that's the BCS, and in terms of the order for this evening, we have a 15-minute keynote speech by Ezechi, and then we'll have a panel conversation for 45 minutes. But I'll hand over to Mameya, who would run you through the rest of the event. Thank you.
Okay, I hope you can all hear me. Great. Thank you very much, Ndide. Thank you. It's my absolute pleasure to be with you this evening, and we're going to have a really exciting conversation coming up. So, of course, with the title being FinTech 2, the next generation innovation, who better than our keynote, who's going to be coming to take the stage shortly to tell us a bit more about his background and also inspire us and also set the scene. It's very hard, I think, to really encapsulate what Ezechi represents. But to me, I think in one word, I would say he's full life cycle, in that he has started a startup, so Neighbor, financial well-being startup. He's investing in other startups through impact capital. And now he's helping create the next generation of talent that will then go on and create more startups. So can you please give a big round of applause and welcome up Ezechi, our keynote speaker.
Brilliant. Just checking everyone can hear me. Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. It was beautiful. I really appreciate that. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you today, and thank you to the BCS for having me, and especially thank you to Nzube for inviting me to speak today. It's an interesting one, FinTech 2.0. We're here to speak a bit about innovation and growth in fintech. I like that concept of whose growth is it anyway? And we've got some fantastic entrepreneurs who are going to give their perspective on that. So I was really excited when Nzube asked me to give my thoughts on the keynote. And to be honest, my first thought was, wow, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to speak to all these experts around my thoughts of the future of fintech. And then I thought, wow, I'm going to be speaking to this room of experts about my thoughts on fintech for the next 15 minutes. And I thought, what do I do about that then? And with most things, I just thought, well, you know what? When all else fails, speak about the thing that's easiest yourself. So I'm quite happy doing that. So hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of this too. I mean, I'm joking to a degree, but when we want to talk about what the future holds, where things are going, I think it's really important to talk about where they've came from and where they are now. And in many ways, I see the journey of fintech mirroring my own. I think, Mameya, you talked a bit about my own journey there, and I'm going to be looping some of that into the conversation that we have today. So first we have to start with, how did fintech get to where it is now? And we can't start the story of fintech without talking about the financial crisis and the credit crunch. There is a name in there that is a curse to many people, but I actually have quite fond memories of, and that's Lehman Brothers. Lehman was ground zero for that crisis. They will then go on to spur the growth of fintech, and it did this by crippling the financial system. This is done through the use of incredibly clever, fiendishly complex, and ultimately destructive credit derivatives. What most of you don't know is that Lehman was also the company where I started my career as a graduate developer in the credit derivatives risk and pricing technology team. I promise you it wasn't my fault that the system went under, but I could tell you a few stories. But that's not the point. But believe me, there was a lot of technology going on behind the scenes, even way back then. We talk about the phrase fintech, and we talk about it being 10 years old, but there's been tech in fin for a very, very long time. As I said, that's not what I'm here to speak about. I'm here to talk about the impact it had on banking technology, particularly in the UK. The fall of Lehman precipitated some serious changes in the banking space, increase in regulation, harsher clawbacks for bankers. Some people won't feel too bothered about that, but that really drove a lot of what happened next. You also had a lot of banking technologists with nowhere to go. When Lehman went under, that entire area was swarming with recruiters. So it was a real horrible situation, but for many people, this was a rare opportunity. Many of these bankers, quants, developers, decided they'd move into the startup space as opposed to continue in the banking world. But part of the reason for that was that they perceived potentially far greater rewards than anything they could have managed in a Lehman, in a Barcap, in a Credit Suisse, in a Deutsche. I also toyed with the idea at the time. This was back in 2009. I remember taking out a loan from Zopa. I played with some of those old platforms. I actually bought a car with the money. Didn't tell them that I was potentially out of a job. Managed to get through it. But rather than join a startup, I actually moved to Credit Suisse in Switzerland, where I helped them spend my next 5 years helping them recover from the crisis and developing my knowledge further. Well, you might not know that Zurich is actually a #1 location for a lot of the blockchain technologies and cryptocurrencies and frameworks come out that place. And actually, a lot of founders out there I know from my time at Credit Suisse. Now, these early stage fintechs that grew out of that time were what I'd largely call fintech with a lowercase t. Largely founded by ex-bankers who knew the weaknesses of the banks and the areas where they were failing to support customers or just had no interest in doing so due to a lack of profitability. These bankers would then set up startups that would attack these verticals. And nowhere has this been more apparent than the explosion of startups in the lending space. Typically focused on a niche, which whilst not profitable to the banks, could potentially be profitable to a lean, nimble, and hungry startup. Which brings me to my next role, which was as co-founder and CTO at Neighbour, financial wellbeing company focused on giving UK employees access to finance through integration through their payroll systems. During my 5 years at Neighbour, I was witness firsthand to the absolute explosion of fintech in the UK, London in particular, which is a world leader in that space, largely in the realm of challenger banks, lending companies, data analytics, but again, typically focused on using technology to pivot existing banking models. And usually in order to either better serve existing banking customers, or in some cases, customers that the banks were just outright ignoring. Now, this rapid growth of fintech led to some really interesting predictions over the 2010s, that the banks would collapse, that startups would become banks, deep tech would take over consumer finance, or that none of this was sustainable and that banks would ultimately swallow up all the fintechs and that the fintech bubble would just burst. It was an interesting prediction. So where are we now? Well, I think it's safe to say that bubble didn't burst. We saw $2 billion of investment in fintech globally in 2010. In 2018, we saw over $50 billion worth of investment in that space. We don't have the numbers for 2019, but earlier on in the year, they were on track for 30 billion. They're almost certainly surpassed 50 billion now. So I think we can agree that fintech is alive and kicking. But the banks have fought back. They've learned a number of lessons from the startups. They're improving their offerings, they're improving the user experience and their efficiencies, they're collaborating with the startups, and in some cases investing in them, and in others incubating them. We've also seen some big failures in the fintech startup space, companies failing because they couldn't reach profitability soon enough. Usually due to those thin spreads, those same thin spreads that the banks were ignoring. We've seen IPOs that have shown serious shortcomings due to the valuations of those companies. We've seen increased regulation and oversight by the FCA and the ICO. But ultimately, through all of that, we've seen an explosion of startups and options that actually make it harder for customers to choose a single provider or to be locked in by one. So it's interesting, we started with all these monolithic banks holding all the data, all the services, and ultimately all the access. Fintech has attacked the services, open banking is attacking the data, an explosion of services have increased access. But what has actually also happened is led to a massive replication of effort and high barriers of entry as opposed to lower. But amidst all that chaos, there is order. There are new insights, new problems being identified and attacked. I've actually always argued that this first wave would power a new generation of fintech founders, ones who would focus on deep technology, creating whole new business paradigms and clients, rather than just taking unprofitable clients from the banks. So ultimately, where am I going with all of this? Well, my most recent transition has been to move into venture capital. I'm a founding member, principal, and CTO in residence for ImpactX Capital. ImpactX Capital is a £100 million fund built by us for the purpose of supporting underrepresented founders and entrepreneurs. And one of the things I actually have to spend a lot of my time doing is thinking about exactly this question. What does the future of fintech look like? If we look at what's happening, we can get a glimpse of that future. We're now seeing a whole generation of startups focus not on those thin verticals, but on the infrastructure needed to power those businesses. It's not an exhaustive list by any means, but just some interesting companies. MX, for example, financial data cleansing and analytics. We've got Plaid, open banking API business, founded in 2013, recently sold to Visa for $5.3 billion. Ant Financial. Anyone heard of Ant Financial? Okay, a few of you. It's funny that most of you haven't. It's actually owned by the founder of Alibaba in China. They're the largest mobile payments platform in the world, and most of you have never even heard of them. They've got over 588 million users, over $150 billion in payments. They're not only the largest mobile payments platform in the world, they're also the largest money market fund on the planet. You've never even heard of this company. Infrastructure player. And no conversation about the future of infrastructure would be complete without mentioning crypto, smart contracts, DLT technologies, and the potential for that infrastructure to change everything, or possibly nothing, depends on the way you look at it. But again, why does all this matter? By building out these tools, the infrastructure that sits behind the scenes, we're making it easier for new companies to grow. What we're actually seeing is the birth of fintech-as-a-service. In the same way that IaaS, PaaS, SaaS all lowered the barriers, finance-as-a-service will do the same. Eventually, we'll see consolidation of these technologies so that any startup can use them. Lending as a service, banking as a service, payments as a service, investing as a service, cross-border transfers as a service. Fintech as a service means lower barriers than ever before. As the cost of building the infrastructure is removed, more ideas can flourish, more startups will be created, increasing innovation, more interesting applications, many of which we can't even begin to guess at today. What we will see is a world where fintech becomes an app feature rather than an app itself. The ability to seamlessly interact with the global financial system will become an expectation and not a privilege. Eventually, fintech will move to the background. It will be ubiquitous. And in doing so, the technology will become more accessible, which will result in increasing portability, interoperability, be more customizable and more automated. From a consumer perspective, we'll see a consolidation of all services in one place, access from the most appropriate device. We will become fintech agnostic. It's just a thing that we expect to be able to do. Fintech-as-a-service will mean an ecosystem of connected services that our devices will be positioned to access and maintain on our behalf. Rather than educating people on fintech, AI and machine learning will grow to fill this niche and make use of these connecting services to make appropriate decisions for us. Imagine a world where your digital avatar notices that your credit score is going down and automatically takes action to start repairing it. Or it notices your bank changing your rates, so it automatically transfers you to a new bank account with a better deal and then starts putting the money that you've saved into an ISA. Or maybe, don't kill me, it sees the price of Bitcoin going up and decides to speculate a little on your behalf as it detected that you have some free cash flow that month. Maybe that one's a bad idea, I don't know, but you get the concept. But this will all be done by a smart device without you having to choose which app to download, sign up to, etc. Fintech as a service ultimately results in better outcomes for customers, new opportunities and greater rewards for those entrepreneurs who create those organizations. So the past, present and potential future of fintech, and in this case fintech 2.0, is a fascinating one. And I know that some of the people on our panel and in the audience today will be critical in creating those new startups and paradigms. I can't wait to see what fintech 2.0 holds, and hopefully I will have invested in a few of the companies leading the change. Thank you very much for listening to me today, and please enjoy the rest of your evening. Sorry.
Thank you so much for setting the scene for us. So I will now take my seat and rejoin the panel, and an exciting panel it is. But I just thought, since we're all in kind of New Year mode, reflecting, thinking about what happened in the past, dealing with the present, and then thinking about the future, just some of the things that I've been thinking about, just to kind of set the tone and to stimulate some ideas in both the audience and also the panel before I go forward with the questions. Some of the, I guess, headlines and sound bites, things that I've been reading and was stimulated by myself. So I think with Ezechi finishing off with, I think the phrase you use is investing in startups. So as a shareholder of JP Morgan Chase, after 9 years there, I was particularly excited to see that JP Morgan has made history with the largest profits in US history, and how, yes, 36 billion they made last year, and how with a market cap of 440 billion, that one bank alone has the same market cap of 10 Eurozone banks combined. So just as we're sitting in London post-Brexit, thinking about how things may or may not pan out for us, just the juxtaposition of the two. And we were talking previously on our kind of warm-up call before the panel about scaling up and some of the challenges. So these are things that are very much on my mind as a happy shareholder, but also as somebody that wants to invest more in fintechs in the UK, what fintechs in the UK need to be thinking about with respect to growth. Another thing I've been thinking about in the headlines, what I would call blockchain bonanzas. So Ezechi did joke about Bitcoin. However, I think what is also very interesting and important is to see governments investing in blockchain. So when I saw that in December last year that China had actually gone live with their pilot of their digital yuan, this is actually quite a big statement they're making in the market. So how does this change things for returns, amongst other things, and thinking about our financial well-being. What I thought was actually quite interesting was reading about First Direct. So First Direct, founded in 1989 in the UK, and became profitable in 1995. Arguably, the UK's first challenger bank is now also going for a push for money wellness and coming up with campaigns and a financial wellness index. So it's just quite interesting that some of these old institutions are also fighting to be relevant. So as we talk, we have a panel full of entrepreneurs who represent the future. Also, we may kind of slide in or pepper the discussion with how institutions can stay relevant for the future as well. What I should have started with is my name is Mami Abonsu, by introductions. Fintech advisor and blockchain advisor, but by background, as I hinted at before, 9 years at JP Morgan, and then I pivoted into the blockchain and fintech world. So it really excites me spending time with entrepreneurs as well as working with institutions to help them stay relevant and innovative. So I'll just pass down the mic and then I'll allow each of our panelists to introduce themselves and tell you a bit about their businesses and any other interesting tidbits they'd like to share before we start the panel discussion.
All right, my name is Mutaz Qubbaj, and so I'm the CEO of CEO and founder of Squirrel. My background is I studied at MIT, was an electrical engineering and computer science degree. Took that, went into finance as a strategist, researcher, and sales trader at Morgan Stanley and Credit Suisse for about 10 years, and Morgan Stanley for about 10 years between Wall Street and the UK. And after that, a couple of years at PIMCO on the asset management side after a London Business School Masters in Finance. About 5 years ago, took to, I guess you could say, it's a brave mission, wanted to become the anti-Wonga. And not to be quoted beyond these four walls, no, I'm just kidding. But it was looking to find a solution to payday loans and started a company called Squirrel, which is about empowering people to take control of their finances. That evolved into a company that gives people a smart bank account that helps people manage their money before they even get access to it. So the idea is you sign up, you get an account, you deposit your money into it, you set a budget, and you only get access to money based on your budget in your current account. So your money is effectively locked away until it's needed. And the idea there is human beings are weak when it comes to money. Instant gratification, FOMO, the ease of being able to spend money and having that pain taken away with, you can look at the evolution from cash to credit to contactless, and now being able to pay with your phone or your watch as evidence of we're able to spend money that we don't have on things we don't need in as rapid a way as possible. And it's, I guess, fintech's here to make sure that people have the ability to empower themselves when it comes to managing their money, managing their spending, managing their finances. My mission is to help people not run out of money.
Hi, I'm Ola Oyetayo, co-founder and CEO of a company called Verto FX. Verto is a currency exchange marketplace. We effectively help businesses access foreign currencies and also make cross-border payments. I originally from Nigeria, moved to the UK about 15 years ago, trained as an accountant, spent about a decade working in banking as well. Did corporate finance for American Express, debt finance at Barclays, spent time working in treasury at Lloyd's Bank as well. A few years ago, sat down at my desk and there was a sort of a currency crisis in Nigeria. The oil prices had crashed. The foreign reserves of the country was in dire straits. The central bank couldn't access much needed US dollar to pay suppliers. And a lot of my friends with businesses back home literally, started giving me calls, asking me to help them out to make payments to their suppliers abroad. And I thought, I set up a WhatsApp group, started matching buyers and sellers of FX, and I think I spent 2-3 months, making a spread on that, and I was making more money than I was working in banking. So I pretty much saw the light. I'd always been entrepreneurial. I thought it was a sign from God, so I'm like, you know what, I might as well go start a company. So my very good friend Tony, we sort of like have a regular, there's 6, 7 of us that have a regular poker session. We were playing poker one of those days, and I told him what I was doing. He has a background building tech platforms for big banks, and he just said, why are you trading on WhatsApp? Just build a platform. And that's how we started Verto. So we help businesses with a particular focus on emerging markets, businesses. We help them access foreign currencies and make payments to suppliers abroad.
Works. Thanks for that. So my name is Obi Noisu, and I am the CEO and co-founder of CoinFloor. We are the UK's longest established, and I would say best, cryptocurrency exchange. And as of December of last year, we announced that we are pretty much the only exchange in the world that is Bitcoin only. We've dropped every other currency other than Bitcoin. I won't use a different derogatory term. So my background was, I was a bit of both. I was born in England. I was conceived in Nigeria. My mother made it across and landed before I popped out. And I've lived almost all my life in the UK with a stint, I think about a year or so in India, setting up an outsourced development center, and a bit of time in Cambridge for autonomy and Scotland. And I've been after university, I was always into computers. I was building neural networks when I was in secondary school, et cetera, Went to UCL, studied computer science and cognitive science, and then I spent 15 years as a CTO. And then I saw the entrepreneurial light and decided to switch and be an entrepreneur, which meant I started from the beginning again and had to learn the skills of being an entrepreneur. I've been doing that for 10 years. So this is my third startup. First one did well, sold. The second one didn't do so well, lost money, but learned a hell of a lot. And then about 6 years ago now, almost at our 6-year anniversary, we set up CoinFloor. And this was because back in 2011, I saw Bitcoin, it was £10. And as a technologist, I thought it was very interesting. I bought a few, and then it plummeted to £2. And I thought, this is useless. And I forgot about it. And then 2 years later, after finishing the second startup, a company I'd angel invested in had fell through, but they came back to me and told me about the idea of setting up an exchange in the UK. And I looked at the price of Bitcoin then, and at that point it was 1,000, and I thought, okay, something's interesting is happening here. But you would effectively have to, we're starting, and we talked about fintech with a lowercase t. What I realized with Bitcoin for the first time ever, we actually had an actual new form of financial technology. And so the entire infrastructure of the banking system would have to be recreated from scratch. And so it couldn't be done with scrappy entrepreneurs and startup entrepreneurs. You needed people with experience of building very scalable, security-focused systems. And that's why I decided to be directly involved in this startup from the beginning. So why do we focus on Bitcoin? Very simply, Bitcoin is the best form of money the world has ever seen. I could spend ages explaining why that's the case, but that is the headline. And once you realize that, and you realize the most important aspect of money is to be a store of value, and that's something that's important to everybody in the world. We spend a whole day working, generating value. We need to be able to have some mechanism to hold on to it. And if you're a millennial, you have none. You cannot buy property anymore, it's too expensive. Stocks and shares are incredibly expensive and overvalued and complicated. Bitcoin, with a mobile phone, I can buy it, and it's outperformed every other asset for 7 of the last 8 years, and it will probably continue to do that. So giving people access to that is probably the most important thing we can do, and that is my mission. And that will reduce the gap between the privileged and the unprivileged everywhere in the world.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you. Well, I am very excited. I hope you are too, because we have a very experienced panel. And I guess the first thing that came to my mind, just hearing each of your respective backgrounds, is that I should also mention my own as far as origins, because mostly because it tends to influence my outlook. So born in Saudi Arabia, but raised in London of Ghanaian heritage. So I very much think globally when I'm thinking about any particular topic. So as I move on to the topic of the fintech landscape, of course, I guess we're still beating our chests about the UK being the #1 place in the world for fintech, and apparently I think by deal value, we're still #1. I would like each of the panelists, given the verticals in which you operate in, so whether it's financial well-being, FX, or crypto, just to give their personal take on fintech landscape. So that can be anything from interesting fintechs you've seen in the past, what your company's planning to do now or in the future, or any predictions you may want to bring into the fore if you're brave enough. So let me start off with you, Mutaz.
Hello. Okay, it's on. Great. We actually had a 2-minute tutorial on how to use these, so pardon me if it goes out. But in terms of the fintech landscape, so from my standpoint, it's I've seen the trend towards what's known as me-centric fintech, or customer-centric fintech. And what that means is that right now there's a number of tools that are easy to access, a number of resources that are easy to get a hold of at whatever stage your company is, that can allow you to address individual consumer needs at a more personal level. And that, I think, has been the biggest wave that a number of the fintech companies have been riding over the past few years. And the idea there is you no longer have to go with a bank-centric model, which is I have a series of products that it's easy for me to produce. I have a series of products that I'm going to try to find buyers for, as opposed to, and this is the right way that whole engagement should be set up. I'm going to go to these buyers, I'm going to go to these consumers, I'm going to go to these users, I'm going to go to this community, figure out their most important needs, figure out how I'm going to be able to solve their problems for them. And that comes from everything tied to potentially finding a way to transfer money across borders and thinking of, well, what did TransferWise do? TransferWise took a model where margins were extremely high from the banking side and the Western Unions out there, and just basically said, well, there's a way to match up buyers or match up supply and demand on either side of the border without money actually having to cross that border. And it's just a very simple idea which said, well, let's find this use, let's find a model that doesn't necessarily have to fall into how legacy institutions have defined it, and let's move forward with finding a solution that works for people on a more cost-effective basis. And then it's also figuring out, well, I'm going to bring in open banking now. I'm hoping that most people are familiar with open banking, but at just a very high level, all banks have to, or the CMA9, the largest banks in the UK, and most banks, if not all banks, are following suit, have to open up access to individuals' transaction data. Once an individual says, I give you permission as a fintech or as a company to access that information. And the idea there is now fintechs have access to data and transactions that they would never have had access to before, outside of using screen scraping technology, which I guess in itself comes with many security risks, because past technology, you'd actually have to provide your password as well as your username for individual fintechs to actually access your information. There's a security risk there if that information gets out. Today, you go to the bank and say, I provide, say, Squirrel, with permission to access all my transactions. So now what I can do is I can look through all your transactions, go through parsing through that information in the best way to provide value to you in a way that makes sense to you. So in the context of what Squirrel does, I'll just walk you through a typical customer journey. A customer will come up to Squirrel, say, I'd like you to help me take control of my money. And what we do is we'd say, well, give us access to your information through this open banking standard. We pull down the transactions, set them up with an automated budget that updates in real time, and then effectively show them exactly how much money they can actually spend on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, as well as show them how that's varied from month to month and week to week, depending on the preferences they set within the app. And on that basis, you can now profile, well, what do their spending patterns look like over time? How does that vary on a seasonal basis? Are they spending more on fuel bills over winter, and should they save ahead of getting to that seasonal bump in terms of their spending on energy bills? And in terms of how that comes back to the fintech landscape, there are so many resources to actually bring that level of production, that level of customization to individuals, because we're going through people becoming more self-entitled and expecting a lot more from every single provider in this market, which is, number one, great and not so great. Great in terms of people are going to expect competitors to come through with the most advanced, I guess you could say, applications using these resources. What's not so great is now the bar has been set so high in terms of what you have to provide to differentiate yourselves from other players in the market. And it's in fintech, there are three things, I guess I'm going to put together an acronym called TOUGH going forward. Trust, understanding, and friction. Those are the three main things that you have to overcome to basically make a fintech business successful. You have to breed trust. I'm asking you for your information. You have to breed trust. I'm asking you for something that has to do with your financial identity. Understanding. If I can't get you on my side of the table in terms of understanding what I'm going to be doing with your information or how I'm going to help you improve your life, because people are looking to buy that better version of themselves, you're not going to want to give me your information. You're not going to want to cooperate from your side. In terms of friction, if it's not seamless, you can bet your top dollar that there's a significant amount of competition out there that's going to look at your model and say, I can do that better. I can bring that to the market faster. I can bring it to the market without friction. So the main theme I see coming through on the fintech side is so much more customization and different types of engagement, because the resources that are out there are different to begin with. We have access to so much data in a way that we could not have imagined in the past, with a lot less friction. And it's just right now the test is seeing if we can convince as many people as possible that the information they're providing in the context, it makes sense in the context of the value that we'll be providing on the back end of that.
So in terms of the fintech landscape and my thoughts, I think it was Paul Volcker, I'm paraphrasing him, the former Fed Reserve president, that said there hasn't been any new financial service innovation since the ATM back in the 50s, right? And I think that's really true. So a lot of the fintech players out there, I think most of, it's a crowded space. Everyone's like putting this nice UI, UX veneer on traditional banking, right? And the guys that are going to win in the long run are the ones that are really solving a problem, right? So, everyone can do all this nice, fancy stuff. The old banks are doing it as well. They just need to hire a developer to build the same thing as well, right? But are you really solving a problem? Are you trying to get, so for us, for example, at Verto, if you're a business in Kenya, right, and you need to make a payment to someone in India, right, you can either go through a monolithic old bank in Kenya, fill some forms, maybe wait 3 days to get some dollars to pay the guy, or you go on a tech platform such as ours, and the payment gets done within 24 hours. I think that's a real problem that is being solved. The only thing that we're doing is we still use banks. It's not, there's no magic to what we're doing. Where we're basically helping using technology to reduce the settlement times, right? So you don't have to go through the whole process of using paper. So I think we should all just be, that's my view in terms of the landscape. There's a lot of gimmicky stuff out there and, nice fancy stuff, but there's no real utility, right? At the end of the day, this nice avatar tells you what to do, but, that doesn't, it doesn't reduce or increase the money in your actual account, right? So the guys that will win in the long run are those that are solving a real problem. Most fintech providers just need to figure out what problem, what the pain point is or the friction is for the customers, and figure out a way to solve it using technology. And in that way, you'll be able to coexist with the banks in the long run.
So I think there are 3 high-level trends that are happening in the world today that will affect fintech, but will affect every vertical. So one is growing, and I think it's going to come to a head over the next 5 to 10 years, which is privacy. And it relates to the second, which is personalization, which was mentioned earlier. And the final one is cyberspace, and us spending more and more time in cyberspace. So I think most people individually will agree with each of these. Privacy, we are giving away more and more data to our suppliers. And we are seeing more and more instances where people are being hacked, losing data, and and the problem is this world of personalization and convenience is at loggerheads with the world of privacy. And so that challenge is going to be a big one to solve. The next is cyberspace. From a very young age, I felt that I wanted to sort of be this being made of energy and travel around the world. I had this recurring dream. And I felt that it was almost impossible to achieve. And I investigated magic at a very young age, and I realized that was probably hocus pocus. I looked at psionic powers and telekinesis and to see if there was something about that. And again, I decided to discount that. And then I finally came across computers, and I felt that maybe in some way I could sort of create some sort of AI technically and download my brain into it. And then thought, that's how I, as a kid, started getting into computers. Maybe that's possible, maybe it's not, but that's, but what I realized is if we were able to spend most of our lives living in a virtual world, we will effectively have that. Every time you play a computer game, you are a being of energy for a period of time. Your consciousness is not in your body at that point. You're focused on the game. And you're able to travel anywhere, you're able to exist anywhere, you're able to fly. Everything you've dreamed of is possible. And that's a very compelling capability, which is why we see this explosive growth in the virtual world and gaming. And so if you just extrapolate that, if you take someone again, focus on millennials, because they'll tell you what's happening in the future. You can see they spend the vast majority of time in a virtual world. Even if they're just playing or using WhatsApp, they're effectively living in that world for the period of time they're interacting that way. So if you combine all these things together, you're going to need technologies that allow us to play and interact and use virtual services online, because that will be the first place people interact. We can see the high street disappearing. Most interactions, food is going to be delivered to your door, every item you want. We're going to work remotely, et cetera, et cetera. But we're going to want to maintain complete privacy, and we're going to want complete personalization. If you extrapolate, you're going to want a bank of one, i.e. you want to be your own bank. The answer to that is cryptocurrency.
No, please go ahead.
I was just going to say something. Shameless plug, I love it. No, it's awesome. No, it's future landscape. No, I totally respect that. By the way, this is entrepreneur hustle. It's beautiful, but it's just in terms of bank of one. What I love about that is it ties to the whole me-centric or customer-centric bank, because you'd mentioned earlier on, I think, that the fintech space will go towards a hub and spoke model. You'll basically be able to see, I think it was one, and you'll be able to see a menu of the pieces of that, or the menu of the services that you want, and be able to pick and choose which of those services through a platform, through a marketplace that you want to have on your plate. And what that does is it basically, number one, relegates banks to the rails or the piping behind this technology. It sits on top of them in terms of transfer, unless it's all done via cryptocurrency. And but the other side is you can now create the menu of services that you need, and that's the ultimate destination in terms of customization. I don't need all these services, and for each of these services, I can pick between the top 3 to 5 contenders that are actually being shown to me based on my profile. And if the value's there, if the value's being put in front of me in such a compelling way, I'm going to probably be willing to, succumb to giving my data, succumb to giving my data up, just in the context of us actually saying, I agree to that Facebook agreement, or that spans 36 pages that you're not going to read through, but you're going to click on I agree to, or that Instagram agreement, or that Snapchat agreement, because you've now been sold on the value that comes with clicking that I agree button without reading the fine print.
This is a question, because this debate is interesting. So do you have concerns about financial privacy, the large companies and small being hacked, losing details of their customers? So we know even governments are being hacked. So no matter how much we trust, we know that you're getting to a point where people are just saying it's inevitable, we're going to lose the data. But the problem with that is when people start to see repercussions in their future life, when they start walking around a corner and potentially being mugged because people are aware of their wealth, levels of wealth, etc. Surely the ultimate solution is to be able to control your data and know if I decide to stop interacting with you as an organization, I can somehow claw back the data from you so that I can know that I am doing that and not have to trust you to tell me you're doing that. Because we've known time and again that people have said they've deleted data when they haven't. So that's I suppose, it's going to come to the head over the next 5 to 10 years.
Definitely, and we're seeing part of that come through with initiatives like GDPR that basically state that if you're non-compliant from a GDPR standpoint, there's a percentage of your revenue, not your profit, that's going to be set as a fine. So it's making sure that, number one, people know what the repercussions are, but number two, people know what the standards are in a very clear fashion. As in, there's an issue when a regulator comes through and says, I won't let you know that you've done something wrong until you've crossed the line. And that's I'm going to put that out there as a criticism. But the idea is, if you're extremely clear as of day one what those lines are that I need to color within, and you're extremely clear about the repercussions of me going outside those lines, then it becomes just something that you have to comply with. The only issue with pushing those initiatives forward is it potentially comes across as a disadvantage to smaller companies that are looking to scale, or smaller companies that want to build a new type of engagement, because you don't have the resources of larger companies that can manage all those types of risks, that can manage that type of collateral damage. If you're a smaller company, there's also a risk of, say, a bigger company getting involved with your own company, because if they make a mistake, and if say, a larger company buys a startup, and then they realize that that startup has an issue with their GDPR setup, that larger company is now going to get fined as a percentage of its revenue, not that startup's revenue. That's a scary thing to think about as well. And it's also something that will potentially stand as a hurdle to larger companies collaborating with or investing in smaller companies. Those are my two things.
Okay. Can I just interject? Just because usually I know with most panels you have the Q&A at the end, but with Nzube's permission, I'd like us to actually interact as an entire community. So there's a gentleman in the front that has a question. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Stephen. I'm an ex-Lehman guy as well. I used to design business systems for them. I wanted to pick up on Obi's question, but in a more brutal fashion. If I'm going to do business with anybody, the first two questions I have is, one, what's your business model? How are you making money out of me? And two, if it goes wrong, who do I shoot? And I don't have the answers to those questions. There is no way on earth I would sign up for an unknown company to have my data. That's just never going to happen. Speaking as a banker, a retail banker, there's a universal truth. There are only two types of customer in this world: those who've got money and those who haven't. The open banking system is intended for those who don't have money. There is an inverse correlation between how often someone checks their balance and how little money they have. So you're going to find it's going to be hard. Monzo are coming up against this. They're finding it hard to actually make money. They're raising lots of capital, but their model of not charging fees is breaking down. They're doing deals like Starling are with the post office to take cash. And this is going to be a problem for open banking. It's not taking off at the moment. People are more concerned about their privacy. And in terms of Bitcoin, that's peer-to-peer, which has nothing to do with the government. That's why governments hate it. That's why governments are developing their own, because they're terrified of cryptocurrency of any description. They lose control. But coming back to your question, the question is, what's your business model? How do you make money? Okay, there you go.
Yeah, sure. So for us, we basically answered the question as well. So, how do we make money? We charge a spread and a spread is just basically also like a fee, on, the buyer and seller, and to ensure that we're able to help them deliver the funds. Are we going to undercut the big banks? Because effectively what we're doing is we're literally using the big banks sort of infrastructure and rails, but in a smarter way. And then your other point, I think we're going to get to this place where sometimes it's what the people want. So when you say that, open banking is really, I mean, I get a sense that you're saying that, well, it's just a fad and it's going to fade. And, because if you have a critical, yeah, if
the people haven't expressed that. It's not a ground up. It's not a grassroots movement.
yeah.
Down.
No, so but when we talk about what sort of functionalities, I hate talking about specific companies, but if you talk about functionalities that a Monzo app has, right, or that a Squirrel is doing, which is basically giving an individual customer a lot more access to the data that they require, right, in order to make effective financial choices. And it could be something that, how many people know how to go into like Excel to build up like a financial plan or something? But if you have a Squirrel telling you, hey, you know what, you've just spent X amount in this store, this has left you with this, but if you think about maybe moving this into this account, you could actually end up in 6 months' time with 500 quid. I think that's a very valuable resource, and the people are going to want that at some point because it makes sense.
So just, please,
So revenue model and the question you asked. So revenue model is very simple. We charge a commission on any trade of purchasing or selling Bitcoin. Our fees can actually be higher than the fees of the traditional financial services space charges but we're still very public about them. And the reason is because the traditional financial space is not going to touch cryptocurrency. And by the time they touch it, I'd probably be retired. And so, and because they have a lot of inertia behind them, and also turkeys don't vote for Christmas, and fundamentally sort of cannibalize their sales, and that's the defense against the large organizations. But in terms of the rest of the questions you asked, to save time, you're preaching to converters, so I agree with you.
I was just about to bring up the point that those are good questions to ask. I'd make the second one less confrontational in terms of those two questions, especially since there's got to be a quid pro quo in terms of I've got to show you value for you to provide value to me. And the idea is if people get that equation wrong, especially at this stage from a fintech standpoint where they're going out and asking for information they either don't need or that the individual on the other side of the table doesn't understand when it comes to how it's being used, that's going to throw a landmine under the progress of something like open banking. And what open banking does is it actually opens up a series of, and by the way, I'm not being paid by anybody on the open banking commission. It's just more because I see the type of information that's available. I see the type of value attached to that information. Not everybody sees that, and everybody's entitled to their own opinion. But at the end of the day, if there's any misunderstanding as to how that information is being used, it's the individual's right and I guess their prerogative to get in front of the service provider and say, how are you going to use my information? Go into it in detail. I'm not comfortable as of now. Get me there.
I do have something to add on it though. And so my view again is as a startup who wants to make it low friction to have people sign up, the idea of open banking does sound interesting, and we'll investigate it. We are investigating it. But I do actually agree with the question asker's point that we haven't had customers ask us, could you integrate open banking? It's just more, as a startup, it would be really convenient to get more information from larger companies, larger banks. And that is worrying, because I think that to the point of solving customers' problems, we've had the most success, funnily enough, by resolving the issues that customers ask us about, as opposed to stuff that we would want to do. So people have asked to make the sign-up process as simple as possible. As one of the cryptocurrency companies that allows you to go from fiat to crypto, we have to deal with the fiat world. We have no choice. And so there's a lot of regulation. And as of Friday of last week, Bitcoin is now regulated, crypto is regulated in the UK, which is a milestone we worked on for 6 years. So we're really happy about that. But it does come with a bucket load of regulation, and we'll have to follow that. And it makes the sign-up process more frictionful. And so we're spending a lot of time thinking about innovative ways to keep it as simple as absolutely possible. Customers ask for that, and when we deliver simplicity to the sign-up process, we see an increase in customers. But generally, when we've done stuff because it would be easier for us, and we've sort of not looked towards the difficult things and looked towards the easy things, it's not worked. So our approach right now, we have many mottos. I won't say our motto. We have no singular motto. But our approach right now is look towards the difficult path and just run straight towards it.
Thank you very much for that question. That's really spiced things up. Okay, we have two more over here.
Hi, I'm Sean. I run a very young startup called Roundups. We use open banking to round up your transactions and donate them to a charity, and then we feed back on what your donations are achieving, basically. So my question is for Mutaz, and the reason I ask this, I'm sure you get it a lot, and it's been leveled at me, so I'm interested on your take, and it feeds into some of what Ezechi was saying about there being a lot of products out there now, and then basically that there's probably too much and it needs to be aggregated in some way. So what's your response to the challenge that the likes of Squirrel should exist inside your banking app? So, you know, we know that the challenger banks want, however they spin it, they all want to be some form of financial control center for you, which will include budgeting and helping you do X, Y, and Z. And I know for us that our long-term strategy would be to power that service inside of banking apps, that we don't have to acquire our own users. And I just wanted to know your perspective on that for Squirrel and anybody else who wants to chime in, of course.
So no, that is it's a great question, and the idea there is it depends on the reception of the bigger players, and it depends on your ability to provide the service in a way that I guess is more effective, more nimble, as well as addresses the problem at a more fundamental level with the right type of value. It's because you could think of the bank is going to provide you, an aggregated service, and the main things there are security and store of value, effectively, and as well as the ability to access your money. And at the end of the day, the banking model ties to net interest margin, just making money on, just how much you're going, that arbitrage between where you're able to borrow money and where you're able to lend it. So everything else beyond that core model is a frill. It's an additional feature. If you can find a way to provide your model or your business in a differentiated fashion such that it provides value that a bank can't compete with, you're doing something in a really great way. If everything could come towards, being under one roof, it becomes where, just one bank has all those features done in the best way possible, that'd be an ideal situation. But at the end of the day, if you're focused on one problem, that's 100% of your time. If a bank's focused on your problem, it's probably a small percentage of their time because it's just a feature. It's just an add-on. It's an addition. So this is where that whole hub and spoke model I'd spoken about before comes into play. If you're providing the best roundup feature that ties into charity out there, I guess one way it could be set up is you could either partner with banks that see you as the best provider for that, or you could be part of a platform where people who've bought into this me-centric version of the world where you're part of that menu, you stand out. So, and it's making sure that when you're pushing this out there, I guess you can see that the easy way to market from a distribution standpoint is partnering with one of these bigger players. It's making sure that you can tell them, I can do this better than you guys can because this is 100% of my time. That's the way I face it.
And are you looking at trying to bring Squirrel into big players?
Ideally, as in right now, the push towards an open banking version of Squirrel is effectively setting Squirrel up as a budgeting layer that can sit on top of any bank account out there. Because the idea right now is the current physical separation of funds sets Squirrel up as a place where, in the most transparent fashion, it's competing for a source of deposits versus banks out there. New models, effectively one where it could collaborate with banks to provide additional value to their customers. And that's the way to put that story out there for anybody in a similar space. I can provide more value to your customers seamlessly. They're going to be more loyal, and the return on just investing in any form of retention measure beats anything you could possibly get in terms of acquiring new customers.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll have a go at that as well, because I think so. We went through a funding process last year, and the main question like Smart Money asked us was, you know, why don't you just sell this as a software, as a, you know, service platform to a bank, right? So, you know, why do you need to have your own currency platform or exchange marketplace? It doesn't make any sense, right? Which is similar to what you're saying. But I think the true benefits of, you know, operating as a sort of a standalone service for a customer that is feeling a particular pain point is you are able to actually aggregate. So right now we have about 7 banks that we work with in different regions of the world, right? If we were just a platform working with, say, Barclays, for example, you know, we would lose that ability to help someone in Egypt, a business in Egypt, send money to Morocco, right? Because Barclays doesn't really have the strength in those regions, right? But by being sort of a layer, right, where you use technology and then use the banking payment rails, right? Swift, you know, all that, you know, cross-border systems, they've been around for a while, right? What you can do is, and this is the benefit of, say, open banking as well, just being able to be in a place where you can connect different providers, whether it's banks, you know, or asset managers, you know, whatever it is, to give value to the consumer so he doesn't have to log into different sort of banks and providers. And you have that layer where using an app or something, he can basically see and you're giving him benefits. I think it's a very strong tool. Otherwise, you know, every fintech should just sell themselves like Plaid to Visa, right? You know, because it doesn't make any sense.
So, just being pragmatic for a moment, it probably depends on the nuance of your business to decide whether it makes sense to partner with larger organizations or to be your own business fully. And I know in the case of CoinFloor, we've gone through, I wouldn't call them pivots, but we've gone through different focuses of customer. And we started off focusing on retail, and then, and that did very well. And we entered the last sort of boom period for Bitcoin. And there started seeing this talk about the entrance of institutional players into the cryptocurrency space. And so we made the call to focus on institutional players. And we put a lot of investment and a lot of money into it. And we talked to a lot of partners to decide to partner with them. We also continue to focus on retail, but we focus on high end in parallel. And defocused from the pure retail part of the market. But the institutional market, talking about partnerships, ended up not bearing fruit and costing us a lot of money and time. They were all interested, but they worked at very, very different timelines and timescales to startups. And we saw over the years a number of startups fail just because they ran out of money trying to court these larger organizations. And something else happened. I realized in a moment of clarity that I didn't just want to have part of the pie, I wanted the whole pie. And no matter how seductive the pie is, you're never going to have the whole pie if you are a piece of some other larger company's business. You can only do that if you are owning your customers directly and getting them correctly, and doing it that way. And so you will be seeing more about that over the coming months, but that is a big part of the focus of the vision of the company at the moment.
One quick thing. So just to reiterate the point about if a bank comes to you and tells you the only way we're going to put this forward is if you can build it into our platform, remember, you're going to have to go through their procurement process, deal with all their resources, and you're nowhere in comparison to what they have to spend and put to use to actually get that up and running. So if they come to you and say that's the only way we'll get a proof of concept off the ground, you've got to stand your ground. And the idea there is you don't want to run out of money. You don't want to basically be one of these dead startups that's sitting there waiting on this exclusivity / proof of concept that's supposed to take you to space and beyond, because they'll find a way. You might be bled dry before you actually achieve that.
Which is a big problem for a lot of the blockchain startups. They'll announce, we've got this proof of concept with X, and I know what that means. It was nice knowing you, basically. Find a way of I mean, I was born in England, but I'm Nigerian by heritage, so I like to make money. A business isn't a business till it's profitable. So find a way to make money and then explore these. But you need to find a way to make money. And I think there's going to be this growing trend amongst even VCs, because not all of them are smart money, by the way. Don't hold them too much. There are some great VCs, but not all of them are, and you need to come to your own conclusion when you're dealing with them. But I think there's going to be this growing realization that it's not just growing numbers in terms of users, etc., but profitable users, profitable, scalable, maintainable business models that are also defensible. It seems like common sense, but there's a lot of big startups out there who have no chance ever of making money profitably.
My name is Osa Andre. I'm one of the co-founders of Hubris One Technologies, along with Ivan, my co-founder is here. So I've got a few questions, a bit greedy with the mic, I should say. First question is actually to Ezechi. First, I'll say thank you for the keynote speech. That was very good. Now, the question to you is, you've transitioned from lots of various stages, and now you're on the other side of VC. How was that transition? And what are you now seeing on that side of the fence that you didn't see on the other side, and thinking, and then you've had this epiphany about it? So that's question to you. Now, the other question goes to the panel, but I'll let you answer that. Pass the mic to you. Sorry, guys.
Well, yeah, so it's kind of like a poacher turned gamekeeper for a start. So, in fact, one of the interesting things about being a VC in the UK is, I don't know if you're aware of the organization Diversity VC. They did an interesting study around VC in the UK, and there was a really interesting point, which was that less than 8% of VCs in England have operational or startup experience. Less than 8%. And considering the amount of technology investment that takes place, less than 4% of UK VCs have technology experience. They also did some research in America, and do you know what the #1 prerequisite to become a VC in Silicon Valley was? That your dad was a VC, right? So, very interesting, eye-opening, because the startup world, and frankly, the technology world, is very meritocratic. You live and die on your ability and capabilities. There is an element of that which is also about network. And having been on one side of the fence and now being on the other side of the fence, it's been absolutely fascinating to see how many people genuinely are trying to fake it till they make it, and how many people really do have a business that can potentially be profitable and scale, right? And that's a thing that we are fundamentally focused on. We are not interested in just pure growth model businesses. We're very interested in companies that are focused on how do we turn this into a profitable company. I'd say that's probably been the biggest learning for me, which is the importance of knowing your numbers, focusing on your audience, focusing on your market, and focusing on the competitive landscape, and what are your protective barriers, your protective moats, and what's going to stop other people from taking you out as you continue to grow. Thank you.
So the other question, thank you for that. The other question actually goes to the panel. So we've talked about the fintech, we've talked about the blockchain and everything else. Now, question to Ola. I know your is it Verto FX, right? Is it strictly fiat-based, or are you sort of collaborating with cryptocurrencies like or be sitting next to you, and you have some kind of collaboration that your platform can be used with cryptocurrencies and still get fiat out, especially to the emerging markets that you had mentioned earlier on?
So yeah, very good question. So it's actually strictly fiat-based for now, and I think it will be for the foreseeable future. The reason why, I'm a big fan of anything that can help legitimate businesses or individuals transact with each other, right? Remove any kind of friction, which we have. There's a lot of friction in cross-border payments, right? And so digital currencies are, one of the ways that you can actually help reduce that friction. I think, Obi probably, would contest this, but I think it's still very much in its infancy as a medium of exchange in the sort of the real world where there's a lot going on in the other side, the dark side of the world, right? But in the real world where I literally want to, I'm a trader in Nigeria. I've bought these generators from these guys on Alibaba in China, right? And I need to pay them, right? You're going to have to convert your Naira to USD or to renminbi to pay that guy. He's not going to, for now, as much as I know in the business-to-business space, want to take money with Bitcoin, right? So as a medium of exchange. At some stage, we have, we spent a lot of time looking at the actual blockchain component. So actually having, because we need to, there's a settlement aspect to it, right? So how do you, if you take money from one country, how do you settle it in another country, and how do you keep a record that the transaction has happened? So the DLT side, I think there's a use case for us. But in terms of using digital currencies as a medium of exchange or helping facilitate that, it's not something that we currently do.
So you stated the point about how mature the technology was, and also about remittance, but specifically the remittance between Nigeria and China. So first of all, to your first statement, you are completely correct. Bitcoin is, and cryptocurrency, but Bitcoin at this stage, even the most mature of the currencies, is still, as of the 3rd of January 2020, 11 years old. So it's still not yet a teenager. It's still a child. And even when Einstein was a teenager, you weren't expecting him to come up with E equals MC squared, and you weren't expecting Arnold Schwarzenegger to win Mr. Olympia at 11 years old. It will take time to be mature enough, and the infrastructure has to be put in place. And that's what we are. We're part of the infrastructure that's going to be put in place over the next 5, 10 years for it to be there. So its first use case, its first killer app, it's in terms of with the British Computer Society, the first killer app for computers. When I was in the 80s, reading all these, as a geek, reading all these personal computer world magazines, the thing that got people to buy computers was spreadsheets and word processors. It was a reason to buy them. It was a lo-fi use case, but it was a use case that was shared by everybody. Now, people still use those, but that's not where most of the money is in computing, but it was the thing that started it. For the internet, it was email, a lo-fi use case, but everybody could see a value to that, and that was a reason to get a modem. And for crypto, it is being a store of value. There's a guy called Thomas Piketty, who wrote Capital in the 21st Century. It's this award-winning tome which looked at the last 100 years, and in a lot of detail showed that the acquisition of wealth and holding onto wealth was the fundamental way to reduce gap in poverty between rich and poor. That's something that everybody values, to be able to store value, not the medium of exchange, the store of value. Now, money has 3 use cases. It's a unit of account, but multiple things can be a unit of account. It can be a store of value and a medium of exchange. Store of value is the first use case, the most important. And Bitcoin already does that. It's performed better as a store of value than any other asset on the planet Earth for the last 10 years. So it does that already. Medium of exchange will come in time, and it requires a critical mass of users to have it. Until then, there's only going to be these edge cases where it makes sense. Some of them are the darknet market, which attracts some smiles and laughter, but although it's actually a very small percentage of the number one mechanism for money laundering is the US dollar. And the number one platform for doing that is actually high street retail banks. Just by official numbers, by far, and Bitcoin doesn't even register as 1%. It's always too small to register as a percentage, but it still gets a lot of news. So medium of exchange, though, is not going to make sense if you just look at the numbers. If you have to convert from For most cases, if I have to convert from pounds to Bitcoin, then transfer from Bitcoin to someone else and pay the fees for transferring, and then go from Bitcoin back to fiat on the other side. I'm doing 2 conversions as opposed to 1, so it's very hard to beat that. There are some cases where it does make sense, and actually, funny enough, one of the few is remittance between Nigeria and China. So there's a lot of requirements for imports into China, into Nigeria from China, and people in China don't really want to receive naira for various reasons, and billions a day are traded between Chinese yuan and Bitcoin. It's one of the largest markets in the world, so it's an incredibly liquid market, and the spreads are incredibly tight. So there is actually a lot of companies who find that their suppliers in China are willing to accept Bitcoin, and accept it as Bitcoin. So then you only need 1 conversion as opposed to 2, and in that very specific edge case, it makes sense. Not big enough for us at this point in time, but there are these weird edge cases. But as a medium of exchange, you need critical mass. You need the gateway drug of store of value to lead to a critical mass of users owning Bitcoin and wanting to have Bitcoin. And at that point, if I want to transfer value from one person to another, I don't have to go through any conversions, because the person who's receiving it already has a ongoing process of saving a certain amount in Bitcoin. So they could just say, I was going to buy some Bitcoin anyway, so I'll just reduce what I buy this month. And the person who sent it already has a balance because they're regularly buying. So it can be a Bitcoin to Bitcoin transaction with no intermediaries. And at that point, you'll see this switch over. But that will be 5-10 years away. And we need to get to critical mass, and that's our job. We're the AOL of this space. We're getting people online.
So beautifully said. Thank you so much for concluding the panel with that statement. And I'm just going to steal 1 more minute. I know our time is up from the panel. Just trying to bring things full circle, as I like to complete the circle. Given that we are all here, most of us, the British Computer Society, just trying to, I guess, deal post-Brexit. In 1 soundbite, I'm just curious for each member of the panel, what your thoughts or advice or guidance or whatever is going on in your head with where we are at the moment with regards to helping to ensure that the UK stays the leader of fintech globally. Just 1 thought to ask.
Yes. It's bearing in mind that Brexit is going to have spillover effects on the entire population, and when in the context of Squirrel, it's thinking about people's purchasing power may decrease on the back of Brexit, and people are going to be looking for things that empower them when it comes to their money, because just there's a lot of uncertainty out there. And if, just as an example, it's a very long soundbite, by the way, if you actually have to import your raw materials or upskill your local talent, that's going to be more expensive to produce things that you would be able to get at a lower price today. So I'm going to ensure that Squirrel's there to actually help people take control of their money so that they can actually face that type of adversity. So look out for volatility in the system and figure out how your solution can address that for your customer by staying in touch with your customer.
My view on this is the UK would stay competitive primarily because the regulator for fintech, in a sense, in the UK, the FCA, is super ahead of its peers everywhere else in the world. So I think the UK would still keep its status as the fintech hub for a few more years, as long as the FCA stays as relevant as it is right now. They're forward thinking. We're licensed and regulated in the UK for a reason, even though we have a tilt towards emerging markets, and that's because this is as fintech friendly a regulator as you'll find anywhere else, and that's why also, to Obi's point, they've actually started regulating crypto assets as well. So post Brexit, as long as the FCA stays as forward thinking as they are, I think the UK will still be a fintech hub for a while.
So crypto tends to do very well when there's global challenges. I mean, we saw with the seconds after the unfortunate events of a week or so ago, in terms of what was happening in the Middle East, the price of cryptocurrency immediately went up 5-10%. So it's probably on a sort of a micro scale. Brexit, cryptocurrencies will do well within the UK as well. If you're expecting house prices, if you're expecting capital to go down in value in the UK, and you need to hedge against that, store of value. That's it. That's its number one use case. So post-Brexit, I'd advise think globally and buy Bitcoin.
So eloquently done. Thank you very much, the panel. And I'll hand over to Ndube now. Thank you.
Thank you. So can we give another round of applause to the to the panel, please, and to Ezechi, our keynote. Thank you so much.